TH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and it's time for another Deck Tech. This is a Patron Deck Tech going out to my patron, Noughtic. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he wanted to see a whole bunch of stuff. We sort of went back and forth a little bit on what his idea would be for the deck. He actually talked about sort of a hate bears using Painter's Servant kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, that sounds a lot like my Dragon Lord Dromoka deck. So maybe hang out, and after I post my video, watch it and see what you think, if you want a similar idea or not. He said, all right, I just watched it. Gotta say I love it, but something similar, but with blue as well. So he wants a Bant version. But rather than being proactive, he wants to hamper down the board. Color specific stuff, obviously, lots of stuff like that. Like Seed Time is one of my all-time favorite spells, he said. He really likes Seed Time. So if that's your favorite spell of all time, we're going to focus that, I think. I think that's the focus that we should go with. So there's a lot going on there. What did I do? This was another one that I had a few ideas, and as I started to research cards, the ideas started to culminate, okay? So Painter's Servant, obviously, is the focus of this deck. Probably even more focus in this deck than it is in my Dragon Lord Dromoka deck where I use it. In that deck, we're turning everything black. And I thought, you know what? In this deck, I think we're going to turn everything blue. I think, why don't we go that focus? And Seed Time, even though it is an instant, you can only play it during your turn. And you take an extra turn after this one if an opponent casts a blue spell this turn. So maybe his play group, they play a lot of counter spells. Obviously, that's where this card is really good. You want your opponent to cast a blue spell during your turn, right? If we make everything blue with Painter's Servant, now if any player casts a spell during your turn, you get to use Seed Time. So that's why I thought, okay, well, let's focus the deck on making everything blue. And since Seed Time is one of your favorite spells of all time, and since it is a 2-mana instant, why don't we put Isochron Scepter in there, right? I don't know if you've ever thought of this or not, but we can put Seed Time on our Isochron Scepter, right? When it enters the battlefield, you exile an instant card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand. So now we can stick that Seed Time on that Isochron Scepter. We put Painter's Servant in play, we make everything blue, and anytime our opponents cast any spell, because all spells are going to be blue, it's going to, trigger our Seed Time essentially, and then we can cast it and take another turn, and away we go. Eyes of the Wisent is another one that I found that is similar, where this is an enchantment, and whenever an opponent plays a blue spell during your turn, you get a 4/4 green elemental creature token. So similar effect. Again, if we're making everything blue, it's going to be a lot better. Autumn's Veil, Veil of Summer, there's lots of cards like this now that everything is blue that we can really take advantage of. Display of Dominance is another one, right? Destroy target blue or black non-creature permanent. This is probably a card that you could just throw in almost any deck anyway, because blue and black are so popular. Don't forget, lands are also blue with Painter's Servant right now, so we can even destroy lands with this. Permanents you control can't be the target of blue or black spells your opponents control, which is going to be important, right? Because that Painter's Servant is really, really important to our deck, and we don't want our opponents just getting rid of it, or we're going to be in tough shape. However, we do have backups. You always got to have backups. Shifting Sky, and this is why I had my version of this deck originally was blue, was because Shifting Sky does something similar, not exactly the same, right? So 3-mana enchantment, you choose a color. We're going to choose blue. All non-land permanents are the chosen color. So this isn't going to work with Seed Time because it's only permanents, so it's not spells being cast, but it is going to work with a lot of the other things we're doing in the deck, right? Like Display of Dominance, for example. We're still going to be able to use those effects. Fairy Swarm is going to be fantastic, right? Fairy Swarm's power and toughness, each equal to the number of blue permanents you control. All of our stuff's blue too, right? Our lands included, so this has flying, and it's going to be, what, a 10/10, 12/12. It's going to be massive. Chameleon Spirit is the version of this that cares about your opponents, right? So it comes into play, you choose a color. And again, there are cards in this deck. There are a few cards where we can choose a color. It doesn't have to be blue. If you want to switch it up, it always depends on the opponents that you're playing. If you're sitting down at a table and everyone's playing green, maybe you want to name green with this. I don't know. If you don't have your Painter's Servant in your hand or in play, maybe you do want to do that. But it has power and toughness, each equal to the number of permanents of the chosen color your opponents control. Why this is particularly good with Painter's Servant, though, is, again, your opponent's lands now become, typically lands are colorless. They're going to become all blue, right? If we name blue with our Painter's Servant. And now this guy is, I don't know what, a 30/30 or a 40. He's massive, right? He's going to be a one-shot kill. Pentarch Paladin is another one. It's got flanking, sweet. You know, who doesn't like flanking? When it comes into play, again, you can choose a color, but we're probably going to choose blue, right? Because you destroy target permanent of the chosen color. So once Painter's Servant is in play, everything's blue. So this just becomes destroy target permanent for 2 mana. Pretty good. Teferi's Moat. Again, if everything is blue, right, we choose blue, right? Teferi's Moat comes into play, you choose a color. Creatures of the chosen color without flying can't attack you. So flying creatures can still attack you, but that usually isn't a huge issue. Pretty much you just can't be attacked because all creatures are going to be blue, right? And then this is a funny one, Psychic Allergy. As it enters the battlefield, again, you choose a color, and we're probably going to choose blue. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Psychic Allergy deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of non-token permanents the chosen color they control. Again, this includes lands. When our Painter's Servant is in play, we're going to name blue. You know, like how many is that? I don't know, 10, 12, 15 damage they're going to be taking on their upkeep. All of our opponents. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy Psychic Allergy unless you sacrifice 2 islands. So that's not great, but you can play this. All your opponents take a whopping amount of damage, and then on your upkeep, you can decide, okay, do I want to keep it around? If you want to keep it around, you can sacrifice 2 islands and have it go around the table again, probably knock out a couple of your opponents. This can just end the game. I really like Mold Adder and Snake Pit in the deck too, because again, remember, all of our opponent's spells are going to be blue, so everything they cast is going to put a counter on our Mold Adder. Everything they cast is going to give us a snake token. These cards, again, these can just be good, right? Blue and black are really popular colors in the format, so even if we don't have our Painter's Servant on the table, these can really do some work, right? Also put Kraken's Eye in the deck. You know, whenever a player casts a blue spell, you gain a life. So anytime any player casts any spell, you gain a life. Again, I talk about how I think life gain is super underrated in the format. Speaking of which, Treva the Renewer is the commander for this deck. You know, you don't have to choose him. Yeah, I mean, you can have Chulainn if you want. You know, you could choose Derevi maybe. Really, you could choose almost anything. I like Treva because it has an ability that cares about color. Also, Underwhelming Commander. Again, that's how I roll. I like underwhelming commanders. If you have Chulainn in the command zone, it's just going to make you a target. Treva is definitely not, right? So 6/6 flyer. When Treva the Renewer deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 and a white. If you do, choose a color. You gain 1 life for each permanent of that color. Guess what? This is going to gain us a life for every permanent on the battlefield, right? Because it's all going to be blue. Everything's going to be blue, lands included. So every time we connect with our Treva, what are we gaining? 30, 40 life? 50 life, like we're just gaining an insane amount of life. We really only have to attack with him once, gain 40, 50 life, and then we're, you know, anytime our life gets even remotely low, we swing with our Treva and we're out of the weeds and we're good. Really like Spellbane Centaur. This one's great. Creatures you control can't be the target of blue spells or abilities from blue sources, right? Basically hexproof or shroud. It's not hexproof though. We can't target our creatures either because all our stuff is blue. Don't think that'll matter. I don't think there's really anything in this deck that is targeting our creatures so that it won't hurt us at all. You do have to be careful with that though. That's why I don't put equipment in these decks, right? You got to be, that's something I learned the hard way. You can't put like a Sword of Fire and Ice in a deck like this because the Sword of Fire and Ice is blue, and so you can't equip it to your creatures, right? That does not work. Also, just have some pro blue creatures in here, right? Great Stable Stag, Shifting Ceratops, just good creatures, you know. It's gonna be unblockable. It's gonna be a creature that can just sit there and block forever. So that's good. And then Thelon's Curse. So this is an interesting one, right? So 2 mana enchantment. Blue creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. So that's every creature. You got to be careful with this, right? This is one that you can just play if you don't have your Painter's Servant in play and you do have a bunch of opponents with blue creatures. Can be good that way, right? At the beginning of each player's upkeep, though, that player may choose any number of tapped blue creatures they control and pay 1 blue for each chosen and untap them. So basically what happens here is you can play this and you have blue mana. So any player that has blue mana can pay for this. You can pay the 1 blue mana and untap your Treva or whatever. Any 1 creature that you want to untap, right? This isn't a super creature heavy deck. Your opponents though, any opponents that you have that don't have blue mana, they just won't be able to untap their creatures ever, right? Because they can't pay the blue mana and all their creatures are blue, right? So it can be really good in that regard. You also talked about how you wanted Elish Norn and Cormusbell, and I decided against the Urborg. You know, I didn't go with Urborg in this deck. You can if you want. If you want to throw Urborg in here and Cormusbell and do that combo as well, you can. I just thought, as I was building it, I thought there was a lot of things that really help with this let's make everything blue strategy. So I stayed away from that. You can throw those 2 cards in the deck if you want. There is, quite a bit of tutors in this deck, so you can get that stuff. I just thought there was an easier combo to do with Ellishnorn, right? That was the combo you wanted. Ellishnorn, Cormusbell. Turn everyone's lands into swamps. All their lands get blown up. You know, that's the idea. I just thought, wouldn't it be fun if we just threw a one-shot in there like Natural Affinity? So Ellishnorn is in the deck. It's just a great card all around, right? Natural Affinity is a one-shot that way. We can just fire this off. All lands become 2/2 creatures until end of turn. So all of our opponent's lands die immediately, right? Because of the Ellishnorn. Our lands turn into 4/4, so we can swing and probably end someone's life, at least one person. But the other reason I put this combo in particular in the deck is because it works fantastically with probably the best card in this deck, which is Llawan Cephalid Empress, okay? So Llawan comes into play and enters the battlefield. You return all blue creatures your opponent's control to owner's hand. So with a Painter's Servant in play, that's everyone's creatures. And your opponents can't cast blue creature spells. Again, so now with a Painter's Servant in play, you bounce all your opponent's creatures. This doesn't affect you, and your opponents just can't cast creature spells, right? You wanted some hate stuff in this deck. This is definitely it. This is not going to make you any friends, for sure. Also works with the Natural Affinity, right? So if we have our Llawan in hand, Painter's Servant is in play, right? So we got our Painter's Servant, everything's blue. We cast Natural Affinity. Now our opponent's lands are all blue creatures. Then we cast Llawan, bounces all of our opponent's lands. Their creatures also, and their lands, right? So you cast Llawan, bounces all of your opponent's creatures and lands back to their hands. I gotta think there's gotta be a few people that are gonna be scooping after that happens. Really cool, interesting combo, I think. Works really good. Again, the Natural Affinity works good with that. Also works good with the Ellishnorn. So I thought I would do that combo instead. Also have Trusted Advisor in this deck, right? Trusted Advisor, what it's gonna let us do, so your maximum hand size is increased by 2. That's good. At the beginning of your upkeep, return a blue creature you control to owner's hand. So this is a way that we can reuse things. First of all, it allows you to reset your Painter's Servant if you want to. So your Painter's Servant is going to be blue, right? Because everything's blue. So at the beginning of your upkeep, if you want to reset your Painter's Servant, you can pick it up and then cast it again and choose a different color. Or if you just want to shut that effect off for your turn, say you just want to pick up your Painter's Servant, everything goes back to normal, then you can do some stuff and then cast your Painter's Servant to make everything blue again if you want to. Also can pick up your Llawan, right? If you want to do that effect again, right? You already have your Llawan in play. Natural Affinity, you draw it. You can now pick up your Llawan to do that effect again, bounce all your opponent's lands. Archaeomancer is another creature we have in the deck. Spellseeker is another creature we have in the deck. We can use those to bounce them back to our hand and reuse them again. So there's a lot of ways to use that card. Also have Tribute Mage, right? We got to be getting these pieces. Tribute Mage gets a artifact with Converted Mana Cost 2. So this will get our Painter's Servant. It'll also get our Isochron Scepter, right? So if we have our Painter's Servant, we can use this to get Isochron Scepter if we want to put Seed Time on it. I mean, you can just go get an Arcane Signet with this if you want to, right? There's always going to be a target for this if you already have the stuff that you want. And then I just threw Otherworldly Journey in there. I just thought, you know what? We can blink our Tribute Mage, we can blink our Spellseeker, we can blink our Llawan. There's a lot of creatures in our deck that we can blink with this. Also saves a creature, right? We need that Painter's Servant, right? So we can blink our Painter's Servant if we want to reset it or if we just want to save it, right? It's going to exile it and then it comes back at the beginning of the next end step, so we can save it from a board wipe. That's really important. I have Balaged Recovery and Eternal Witness, you know, just great cards in general, but we really got to make sure, you know, someone destroys our Painter's Servant. We have a lot of ways to protect it. We got to get it back, though, if it gets destroyed. I also have Rift Sweeper, right? This is a very unique card. When Rift Sweeper enters the battlefield, choose target face-up exiled card. Its owner shuffles it into their library. So there's some ways you can use this card, right? If your opponent has a card that is, say, suspended, you can shuffle it into their library and now they don't get it. There's some little tricks that you can do with this card. However, we're going to use this if someone happens to exile our Painter's Servant. Maybe they cast a Merciless Eviction, right? If someone casts Merciless Eviction, exiles all creatures or artifacts, there's nothing we can really do except counter it. We can counter it. We do have counter spells in this deck. But if it gets exiled, we don't want to just be screwed. We can go get Rift Sweeper out of our deck because we do have lots of creature searching stuff in our deck as well. Cast it, shuffle our Painter's Servant into our library, so that we can then search for it again, right? Also, interesting interaction here. If our Painter's Servant dies, we also have Masked Vandal in the deck, right? So we can cast Mass Vandal, assuming our Painter Servant is dead in our graveyard. It enters the battlefield. We exile a creature card from our graveyard, so we'll exile our Painter Servant, and then we'll cast our Rift Sweeper and shuffle it back into our library. Just a little funny, interesting interaction that I discovered in the deck. We have Heroic Intervention, Teferi's Protection. We gotta protect that Painter Servant. We really gotta protect a lot of the stuff on our board. You know, a really devastating board wipe would be really bad for us. I also have Curfew. This is one of my personal favorites. There's a lot of ways to use this. 1 mana and it just saves a creature, right? This just, someone board wipes, 1 mana, we pick up our Painter Servant. All of our opponents pick up a creature too. Curfew is also fantastic against a Voltron deck, because if they only have 1 creature, then they got to pick it up. You can use this in a lot of ways, but for us, this is, 1 mana, we save our Painter Servant, so then we can cast it again on our turn. And then I threw Yasharn in the deck. You know, he works. We do have a couple blink effects where we can blink them and go get more forests and plains. I made sure not to put any, I just double checked. I know you had mentioned this card that you wanted it in there. You did want some Hate Bears stuff in there. This fits in the deck, I think, really well. Players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. It does fit. It doesn't hurt us. I actually took the fetch lands out for that reason, because fetch lands, this guy hates on fetch lands, right? You can't crack your fetch land when this guy's in play. So, with that being said, you can put the fetch lands in if you want. Take him out. Obviously, you can make the adjustments that you want. The counter spells, the removal I put in, same thing. You can adjust any way you want. For the lands, I'll just talk about the lands briefly. When I put lands in my deck techs, I do put fetch lands and shock lands in typically. I put the stuff in that I typically use. I really like the check lands. I really like the scry lands. I usually use those. I mean, you can use what you want. Obviously, that's an easy switch, right? If you have dual lands, swap them out. Go right ahead. Whatever your mana base is, for the deck lists, I just put what I typically use. And if you don't have fetch lands or shock lands or whatever, swap it out for whatever you would normally use. That goes for any of my deck techs, right? Any of the decks that I make. So that is pretty much it. There was a lot going on there, and I sort of just formulated this plan as I was looking. I thought, okay, you talked about Painter Servant, you talked about Seed Time. I thought it'd be great to make a deck where Seed Time could be sort of the focus. It's a little hard to use because you have to rely on your opponent to cast a spell on your turn. But if all spells are blue, now, you can do that, right? You can put Painter Servant in play. Everything that gets cast is blue. So all your opponents have to do is cast any spell during your turn, and it's going to trigger your Seed Time. And if it's on your Isochron Scepter, then you can really go to town and have some fun. That is my Treva Painter's Servant Hate Bears deck, we'll call it. I guess my patron Noughtic can call it whatever he dang well pleases. But that is it for today. If you want a deck tech of your own, you can join my Patreon. Top tier patrons get a deck tech just like this of their own. The link for my Patreon is in the description below. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.